The Valori ship hung in Earth's orbit like a mountain made of metal. It was bigger than anything humans had ever built. The dark hull blocked out the sun as it passed over cities, casting shadows that made children point and adults grow quiet with fear. Inside the United Nations building in New York, the world's leaders waited. They had prepared for this moment for decades. Movies had imagined it. Scientists had dreamed of it. Now, it was real. Aliens had come to Earth. The Valori delegation walked through the doors, and every human in the room held their breath. They were massive. Each alien stood over 8 feet tall with thick bodies covered in dark green scales. Their eyes were yellow with black slits, like a snake's eyes but filled with cold intelligence. They moved with the confidence of creatures who had never known fear. Ambassador Kethra led the group. He looked around the room at the gathered humans and felt something close to amusement. These creatures were so small, so soft. Their skin had no armor. Their teeth were flat and useless. Their bodies were weak and fragile. He had conquered worlds. He had crushed civilizations that were far more impressive than this one. These humans would be easy to control. The diplomats smiled and shook hands. They spoke of peace and cooperation. They offered gifts and signed papers. Kethra played along because it was easier than fighting. Why waste soldiers when you could use words? He sent his report to the Valori High Council that night. Humans are not a threat, he wrote. They are weak, primitive, and eager to please. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their military could not scratch our ships. I recommend we bring them into the Dominion as a labor species. They will serve us well. The High Council agreed. The Valori Dominion had ruled dozens of star systems for thousands of years. They had conquered 17 civilizations. They knew how to spot dangerous species, and humans were clearly not dangerous. What they did not understand was that humans had sent their kindest people to meet them. The diplomats were chosen because they could smile and speak softly. They were not chosen to show what humanity really was. Commander John Mercer watched the meeting from the back of the room. He was 62 years old with gray hair cut short and a face lined with hard years. He had served in the Marines for 30 years before retiring. His body carried scars that told stories of battles most people had forgotten. He noticed how the aliens looked at the humans. He saw the slight curl of their lips, the dismissive way their eyes moved over the crowd. He had seen that look before. It was the look of a predator studying prey. John said nothing. He was just an observer, a military advisor who had been invited to watch. But he made mental notes. He studied how the aliens moved. He watched how they held themselves. He counted their weapons and measured their reactions. Old habits never truly died. Over the next few months, things moved quickly. The Valori offered humanity a place in their dominion. They called it a partnership. But John could read between the lines. It was control dressed up in pretty words. Earth's leaders accepted. What choice did they have? The Valori had ships that could destroy cities. They had weapons humans could not match. Fighting was not an option. 3 colonies were established in Valori space. Thousands of humans volunteered to go, excited by the chance to live among the stars. They packed their bags and said goodbye to Earth. Filled with hope for a new beginning, John watched them leave from a military base in Texas. He stood next to General Kate Sullivan, a woman of 73 who had led troops in 4 different wars. Her body was old, but her mind was sharp as a blade. They have no idea what they're walking into, John said quietly. Kate nodded slowly. The Valori see us as harmless. They think our smiles mean we are weak. They don't know our history. No, Kate agreed. They don't know what we've done to each other. They don't know what we're capable of when someone pushes us too far. John thought about the wars he had fought. He thought about the blood and the fire and the screaming. He thought about friends who had died in his arms and enemies he had killed with his bare hands. Humans were not gentle creatures. They had just learned to hide it well. How long do you think before things go wrong? He asked. Kate looked up at the sky where the colony ships were disappearing into the darkness. Not long. The Valori are bullies. They will push until someone pushes back. And when that happens, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. On the colony world of New Haven, the first humans landed and began building their new home. They worked hard in the alien soil, planting crops and constructing buildings. They smiled at their Valori overseers and followed every rule without complaint. The Valori watched them with growing contempt. These creatures were so obedient, so eager to please. They worked long hours without protest. They bowed their heads when spoken to. They never raised their voices or showed anger. Commander Vexnar, the Valori officer in charge of New Haven, reported to his superiors that the humans were perfect subjects. "They are like trained animals," he wrote. "They do whatever we tell them. They have no spirit, no fire. Managing them requires almost no effort." What Vexnar did not notice were the small things. He did not notice how the human veterans, men and women who had served in Earth's military, always positioned themselves near exits. He did not notice how they constantly watched the Valori guards, studying their patterns and their weaknesses. He did not notice how Staff Sergeant Ben Carter, a man with kind eyes and a soft voice, had survived 3 combat tours and knew 47 ways to kill someone with his bare hands. He did not notice how Captain Amy Reyes, who worked in the colony's medical clinic, had once led a SEAL team through enemy territory for 6 days without losing a single soldier. He did not notice how these battle-scarred humans smiled and nodded and played the role of harmless workers, all while waiting and watching and remembering exactly who they were. The Valori believed they had conquered a species of sheep. They had no idea they were living among wolves. 6 months passed on New Haven, and the humans continued to work in silence. They built homes and grew food. They raised their children and tried to create a normal life under alien rule. But normal was becoming harder to find. The Valori demands grew worse each week. Governor Laura Mitchell sat in her small office, staring at the latest orders from Commander Vexnar. The food quota had doubled again. The colonists were already working 12-hour days in the fields. Now they would have to work 16. She rubbed her tired eyes and thought about her people. They were good people. Farmers and teachers and doctors who had come to the stars looking for opportunity. They deserved better than this. Laura walked to the Valori command center to speak with Vexnar. She had to try. She had to make him understand that his demands were impossible. The commander's office was cold and dark, the way all Valori spaces seemed to be. Vexnar sat behind a massive desk, his yellow eyes watching her with bored contempt. "The new quotas cannot be met," Laura said, keeping her voice calm and respectful. "Our people are already exhausted. If we push them harder, they will collapse. Production will drop, not rise." Vexnar leaned forward, his scales catching the dim light. "Are you telling me what I can and cannot do, human? I am simply explaining. You explain nothing to me." His voice was a low growl. "You are livestock. You exist because we allow it. You will meet the quotas, or you will be punished. This is not a discussion." Laura swallowed her anger. She had learned to swallow it many times over the past months. "Yes, Commander." She left the office with her hands shaking. Not from fear, from rage. The punishments began soon after. When a young farmer named Danny could not finish his work, Valori soldiers beat him in front of his family. When an older woman named Grace spoke too loudly near a guard, they broke her arm. When children played too close to the command center, soldiers kicked them and laughed. The humans endured it all. They helped each other heal. They whispered words of comfort in the night. They kept their anger buried deep inside, where the aliens could not see it. But anger does not disappear when you bury it. It grows. Staff Sergeant Ben Carter worked in the eastern fields, pulling weeds and planting seeds like any other farmer. He was a quiet man of 45, with strong hands and sad eyes. Most people did not know about his past. They did not know he had been an Army Ranger. They did not know he had survived things that would break most men. Ben had a daughter named Lily. She was 12 years old with her mother's smile and her father's stubborn spirit. After his wife died on Earth, Lily became everything to Ben. She was his reason for breathing. His reason for staying gentle in a world that had given him so many reasons to be hard. One evening, Lily was walking home from school with her friends. They were laughing about something silly, the way children do. They did not notice the group of Valori soldiers watching them from across the street. One of the soldiers, a young warrior named Crix, had been drinking. He was bored and angry about being assigned to guard duty on this miserable planet. When he saw the human children laughing, something dark twisted in his chest. "They mock us," he said to his companions. "These animals dare to be happy in our presence." The other soldiers tried to calm him, but Crix was already moving. He walked toward the children with his weapon drawn. What happened next took less than a minute. When Ben arrived at the scene, his daughter was already gone. He knelt beside her small body in the dirt. Her eyes were open, but they saw nothing. Her hand was still warm when he held it. Around her lay 3 other children, all silent, all still. Ben did not scream. He did not cry. Something inside him simply went quiet. The part of him that had learned to be soft, to be gentle, to be a father instead of a soldier, that part died with his daughter in the alien dust. He picked up Lily's body and carried her home. People watched him pass, but no one spoke. They could see something in his face that frightened them. Something empty and cold and patient. Governor Mitchell called an emergency meeting that night. The small room was packed with colonists, their faces showing shock and grief and something else. Something harder. "This cannot stand," a woman named Carol said, her voice breaking. "They killed our children. What can we do?" another man asked. "They have weapons. They have ships. We have nothing." That's not entirely true. Everyone turned to look at Captain Amy Reyes. She stood in the corner, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Until now, she had been known as a friendly nurse who worked at the clinic. But something in her posture had changed. The way she held herself was different. Military. Dangerous. "I served in the Navy SEALs for 15 years, she said simply. "Before that, I trained at some of the hardest schools on Earth. I know how to fight. I know how to win." Silence filled the room. "I'm not the only one," Amy continued. "There are veterans throughout this colony. Rangers, Marines, Special Forces. We kept quiet because we wanted peace. We wanted a new start." Her jaw tightened. "But peace is no longer an option." Ben Carter stepped forward. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with something that made people step back. "I buried my daughter today," he said, his voice soft and steady. "I held her hand while she grew cold, and I made her a promise." He looked around the room at his fellow colonists. "I promised that the ones who did this would pay. Every single one of them." Governor Mitchell looked at the faces around her. She saw farmers and teachers and doctors. But she also saw something else now. She saw the ancestors of these people, warriors and survivors, who had fought through ice ages and plagues and world wars. She saw thousands of years of human history written in their eyes. "How many veterans do we have?" she asked. Amy answered without hesitation. 300 with combat experience. Another 500 who can be trained quickly." "And how many Valori are on this planet?" "About 2,000 soldiers, plus support staff." Mitchell nodded slowly. The math was bad. Very bad. But she had learned something important about her people in that moment. They were done running. They were done bowing. They were done being afraid. "Then we better start planning," she said. That night, coded messages began traveling between the 3 human colonies. Veterans who had hidden their pasts for months started reaching out to each other. Old skills were remembered. Old lessons were taught to new students. The Valori continued their patrols, confident and careless. They did not notice the change in the air. They did not see the hardness creeping into human eyes. They had woken something ancient and terrible. And they had no idea what was coming. The weeks that followed were strange and quiet on New Haven. To the Valori, nothing seemed different. The humans still worked in the fields. They still bowed their heads and spoke softly. They still obeyed every order without question. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Captain Amy Reyes moved through the colony like a ghost. During the day, she worked at the medical clinic, bandaging wounds and giving medicine to sick children. At night, she held secret meetings in basements and barns, teaching farmers how to become soldiers. She called them community defense committees on paper. The Valori saw the name and laughed. What could these weak creatures possibly defend themselves against? They never attended the meetings. If they had, they would have seen Amy drawing maps of the Valori patrol routes. They would have heard her explaining how to kill an 8-foot alien with nothing but a knife and patience. They would have watched as she turned shopkeepers into assassins with the calm voice of a woman who had done this many times before. The Valori are bigger than us, she told her students. Stronger, better armed. But they are not smarter. They have never fought an enemy who thinks like we do. They have never faced guerrilla warfare. She drew circles on her map showing enemy positions. They walk the same paths every day. They guard the same doors. They sleep at the same times. Patterns make you predictable. Predictable means dead. Across the colony, other veterans were doing similar work. Master Sergeant Dan Cooper had lost his left leg in a war on Earth 20 years ago. He walked with a metal replacement now, a prosthetic that whirred softly with each step. The Valori saw his limp and assumed he was harmless. They could not have been more wrong. Dan ran survival classes in the community center 3 times a week. Officially, he taught people how to find water and build shelters. Unofficially, he taught them how to fight. Forget everything you've seen in movies, he told his students. Real combat is ugly and fast and mean. You don't win by being brave. You win by being smart and ruthless and willing to do whatever it takes. He showed them how to use farm tools as weapons. How to turn a simple piece of wire into something deadly. How to strike fast and disappear before the enemy could react. The Valori think honor matters in war, Dan said with a cold smile. They think there are rules. Humans gave up on that idea a long time ago. We learned that winning is all that matters. Everything else is just words. Dr. Chris Palmer worked at the colony hospital, treating broken bones and delivering babies like any small-town doctor. But in his spare time, he was building something else. Something the Valori would never expect. Before coming to New Haven, Chris had served as a combat medic in 3 different wars. He had crawled through mud and blood to save wounded soldiers. He had performed surgery in the dark with bombs exploding overhead. He knew exactly what human bodies looked like during real fighting. Now he was stockpiling supplies, bandages, and painkillers, surgical tools, and blood bags. He trained nurses and volunteers in battlefield medicine, teaching them how to patch wounds quickly and move on to the next patient. When the fighting starts, he told his team, people will get hurt, a lot of people. Our job is to keep them alive long enough to keep fighting. Speed matters more than perfection. Every second counts. Above all these preparations stood General Kate Sullivan. She lived in a small farmhouse at the edge of the colony, an old woman who grew vegetables and rarely left her property. The Valori had checked her background and found nothing interesting. A retired military officer, yes, but too old and weak to matter. They did not know that Kate had commanded troops in 4 major wars. They did not know that she had never lost a battle in 40 years of service. They did not know that her small farmhouse had become the nerve center of a resistance network spanning 3 colonies. Messages came to her from everywhere. Reports on enemy movements, lists of weapons and supplies, updates on training progress. Kate read them all and planned her response with the patience of a chess master preparing for a long game. Governor Mitchell visited her one night, slipping through the fields to avoid Valori patrols. "How are we doing?" Mitchell asked. Kate looked at her maps and charts spread across the kitchen table. "Better than I expected. Our people learn fast. They're motivated, angry enough to win." Kate set down her pen and met the governor's eyes. "You need to understand something about what we're planning. This will not be clean. This will not be quick. People will die, good people, innocent people. The Valori will not surrender easily. They will fight back with everything they have." Mitchell nodded slowly. "I know. Do you?" Kate's voice was gentle but firm. "When this starts, there's no going back. We will be at war. Real war. The kind that changes everyone it touches." She paused. "Are you ready for that?" Mitchell thought about the children lying dead in the street. She thought about the bruises on her people's faces. She thought about the fear in their eyes every time a Valori soldier walked past. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." Kate smiled grimly. "Good. Because the Valori just made a mistake that will cost them dearly." "What mistake?" They announced they're sending a battalion to restore order. 800 soldiers. Arriving in 3 weeks. Kate pointed to her map. "They think a show of force will remind us of our place. They have no idea they're walking into a trap." The next 3 weeks were a blur of activity. Weapons were hidden in secret places throughout the colony. Tunnels were mapped and marked. Fighting positions were prepared in buildings and fields. Ben Carter barely slept during this time. He spent his days working like a normal farmer, and his nights setting up sniper positions in locations the Valori would never think to check. Water towers, church steeples, the tops of grain silos, each one offered clear lines of fire to enemy patrol routes. He cleaned his rifle every night, a weapon he had smuggled to the colony in pieces hidden among farming equipment. The Valori had never found it. They had never thought to look hard enough. 3 weeks, he whispered to himself in the darkness. 3 weeks, and then we show them who we really are. The Valori battalion arrived exactly on schedule. 800 warriors in gleaming armor, carrying weapons that could punch holes through steel. They landed in perfect formation outside the colony, their transport ships kicking up clouds of dust. Commander Vexnar watched them with satisfaction. This would be easy. A few executions, some public beatings, and the humans would remember their place. They were livestock. Nothing more. They would learn to fear their masters again. He gave the order to advance. The soldiers marched toward the colony in neat rows, their boots shaking the ground. They passed empty fields and quiet buildings. No humans were visible anywhere. Vexnar frowned. Where were the workers? Where were the crowds of frightened faces he expected to see? He was still wondering when the first shot rang out, and then the world exploded. The first volley came from everywhere at once. 60 Valori soldiers dropped in the opening seconds, hit by bullets they never saw coming. The shots came from water towers and rooftops, from windows, and hidden holes in the ground. By the time the survivors understood what was happening, another 40 were dead. Commander Vexnar screamed orders at his troops, but his voice was lost in the chaos. His soldiers were trained for open battle, for standing in formation and crushing enemies with superior firepower. They had no idea how to fight an enemy they could not see. Ben Carter lay flat on top of a grain silo, his eye pressed to his rifle scope. He had been waiting in position for 6 hours, barely moving, barely breathing. Now he moved with the smooth efficiency of a machine. Aim, breathe, fire. Move to the next target. Each shot found its mark. Valori officers fell one by one, their communication systems destroyed, their command structure crumbling. Ben felt nothing as he pulled the trigger again and again. The part of him that could feel had died with his daughter. On the ground, Captain Amy Reyes led a strike team through maintenance tunnels beneath the colony. The Valori had never mapped these tunnels. They had never thought the humans might use them for anything important. Amy and her team emerged behind the enemy lines like ghosts. They struck fast and hard, cutting down soldiers before disappearing back underground. The Valori spun in circles, firing at shadows, hitting nothing but air. They're everywhere. A Valori sergeant shouted into his radio. They come from the ground, from the buildings, from... His voice cut off with a wet gurgle. Master Sergeant Dan Cooper commanded a militia unit near the colony's eastern edge. His people were farmers and shopkeepers who had trained for only 3 weeks, but they followed his orders without question, and they fought with a fury that surprised even him. "Remember your training," he called out to his fighters. "Move and shoot. Don't stay in one place. Make them chase ghosts." His militia used tactics from wars the Valori had never studied. They set traps learned from the jungles of Vietnam. They fought in pairs like soldiers in the streets of Stalingrad. They appeared, attacked, and vanished like fighters in the mountains of Afghanistan. The Valori had conquered 17 civilizations, but those civilizations had fought with honor and rules. Humans fought with something else entirely. They fought to win. Commander Vexnar tried to rally his troops in the town square. They formed a defensive circle, back to back, weapons pointing outward. It was a standard tactic that had worked against dozens of species before. Amy Reyes had expected exactly this. She gave a signal, and her team detonated explosives hidden beneath the square days earlier. The ground erupted, throwing Valori soldiers into the air like broken toys. Those who survived the blast stumbled to their feet only to find humans pouring out of buildings on all sides. The fighting was brutal and close. Valori warriors were stronger than humans, but humans were faster and more creative. They used knives and clubs and improvised weapons. They worked in teams, 3 or 4 humans taking down one alien through coordination and ruthlessness. A young Valori soldier named Cass watched in horror as his squad was torn apart. He had been told humans were weak and cowardly. He had been told they would run at the first sign of force. No one had told him that humans had been killing each other for 200,000 years. No one had explained that they were evolution's most successful predator. No one had warned him that these soft, smiling creatures were capable of violence that would make a Valori warrior sick. Cass dropped his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. A human woman approached him, small, gray-haired, with kind eyes and a rifle in her hands. "Please," he begged. "I surrender. I am your prisoner." General Kate Sullivan looked at him for a long moment. Then she lowered her rifle. "Take him to the holding area," she told her soldiers. "We're not like them. We don't kill those who surrender." Some of the humans grumbled, but they obeyed. They understood what Kate was teaching them. Victory was important, but so was keeping their humanity. They would not become the monsters they were fighting against. 3 hours after the battle began, it was over. The Valori battalion had been destroyed. Of the 800 soldiers who had landed that morning, fewer than 50 survived as prisoners. The rest lay scattered across the colony. Their dreams of easy conquest ended forever. Human losses were lighter but still painful. 83 colonists had died in the fighting. Another 200 were wounded. Dr. Chris Palmer and his medical team worked through the night, patching holes and saving lives with hands that never stopped moving. Ben Carter walked through the aftermath with empty eyes. He felt no joy in the victory, no satisfaction, only a cold emptiness where his heart used to be. He found Commander Vex Nar hiding in a damaged transport ship, trying to call for rescue. The Valori commander looked up as Ben entered, his yellow eyes wide with fear. "You," Vex Nar whispered. "I remember you, from the fields." Ben nodded slowly. "And I remember you. You gave the orders. You let your soldiers do whatever they wanted. You laughed when they beat us. I was following protocol. You killed my daughter." Silence fell between them. Vex Nar's scales seemed to grow pale. That was not me personally. One of my soldiers, your orders, your responsibility. Ben's voice was soft, almost gentle. "You looked at us and saw animals. You thought we were weak because we chose to be kind. You never understood that kindness is a choice, and so is violence." He stepped closer, and Vex Nar pressed himself against the wall. "We could have been your friends," Ben continued. "We could have built something good together. But you didn't want friends. You wanted slaves. You wanted to hurt us because it made you feel powerful." Ben knelt down until his face was level with the alien commanders. "Did you feel powerful when you ordered those children killed? Did it make you proud?" Vex Nar had no answer. For the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be helpless, to be small, to be afraid. "I'm not going to kill you," Ben said quietly. "Not because you deserve mercy, but because my daughter wouldn't want me to become a monster." He stood up and walked toward the door. "You'll stand trial. You'll answer for what you did, and then you'll live the rest of your life knowing that the creatures you called animals defeated you." He paused at the door and looked back one final time. "Remember this feeling. Remember what it's like to be powerless. And remember that we gave you a chance to treat us as equals, and you chose this instead." "Are you?" Ben walked out into the morning light. The sun was rising over New Haven, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Around him, Colonists were already beginning to clean up the damage and care for the wounded. They had won this battle. But they all knew the war was just beginning. The Valori Dominion would not ignore what had happened here. More ships would come. More soldiers, but something had changed in the humans of New Haven. They walked differently now. They spoke differently. The fear that had lived in their eyes for months was gone, replaced by something harder and brighter. They had remembered who they were, and they were ready for whatever came next. News of the New Haven battle spread across the Valori Dominion like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every world in the Empire had heard the impossible story. 800 elite soldiers, defeated by a handful of farming colonists. It could not be true. It had to be propaganda or a mistake. But the reports kept coming. Images of dead Valori warriors lying in alien dirt. Recordings of human fighters moving with deadly precision. Survivor accounts that spoke of enemies who appeared from nowhere and killed without mercy. The High Council met in emergency session on the Valori homeworld. The great chamber was filled with angry voices and frightened whispers. How could this happen? Who was responsible? What would they do now? We must send the fleet, Admiral Vormach demanded, his scaled fist pounding the table. We must burn these humans from existence. Their entire species must be destroyed for this insult. Other voices shouted agreement. War drums began to beat in the ancient halls. The Dominion had ruled through fear for 1,000 years. They could not allow this defeat to stand, but one voice remained silent. Admiral Lorcan, the Dominion's chief military strategist, sat in his chair and said nothing. He was old for a Valori. Over 200 years. And he had seen many wars. He had learned that the most dangerous moments were often the ones where rage overruled reason. Admiral Lorcan, the High Chancellor said finally. You have not spoken. What is your counsel? The old admiral stood slowly. The chamber fell quiet. Before we make any decision, he said, I believe we should understand what we are dealing with. I have spent the last 3 days studying human history. What I found. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What I found disturbs me greatly. He touched a control panel, and images appeared in the air above the table. Pictures of human battlefields, cities reduced to rubble, weapons that could destroy entire nations. We assumed humans were peaceful because they greeted us with smiles and kind words, Lorcan said. We were fools. They sent diplomats because they were trying not to kill us. The veterans in those colonies, they were not farmers pretending to be warriors. They were warriors pretending to be farmers. The images kept coming. World wars that killed tens of millions. Nuclear weapons used against their own kind. Genocides. Atrocities. Centuries of violence on a scale the Valori had never imagined. Humans do not fight like other species, Lorcan continued. They fight like predators. They adapt. They learn. They are willing to do absolutely anything to survive. They have spent 200,000 years killing each other, and they are still here, still growing, still spreading. He let the images fade. Admiral Vormach suggests we destroy them. I have studied this possibility. Our fleet is powerful, yes. We could likely defeat their military in open battle. But then what? They would not surrender. They would scatter among the stars and wage war against us forever. Every colony, every outpost, every ship would become a target. We would be fighting an enemy who does not know how to give up. The chamber was silent now. The war drums had stopped. There is something else, Lorcan said quietly. Something I noticed in my research. Humans are at their most dangerous when they believe they have nothing to lose. When you push them into a corner, they become something terrible. The soldiers who attacked our battalion on New Haven, many of them had lost children, family members, friends. They were not fighting for victory. They were fighting for revenge. And there is no force in the universe more dangerous than humans seeking revenge. The High Chancellor leaned forward. Then what do you suggest? I suggest we do something the Dominion has never done before. Lorcan took a deep breath. I suggest we make peace. Real peace. Not subjugation dressed in pretty words, but a true alliance between equals. The chamber erupted in shocked protests. The Valori had never treated another species as equals. They were conquerors, masters of the galaxy. How could they bow to these primitive creatures? Lorcan waited for the noise to die down. Consider the alternative, he said. We have ruled 17 civilizations through fear. None of them have ever fought back like this. None of them have ever beaten us in battle. What does that tell you about humans? He met the eyes of each council member in turn. It tells me that they are different. It tells me that they are stronger than anything we have faced before. And it tells me that if we make them our enemies, we will regret it for generations to come. The debate lasted for 3 days. In the end, Lorcan's argument won. Not because the council agreed with him, but because they were afraid. For the first time in their history, the Valori had met something that frightened them. General Kate Sullivan received the communication in her farmhouse on New Haven. She read the message 3 times before allowing herself to smile. They want to negotiate, she told Governor Mitchell. Real negotiations. They're offering recognition of human sovereignty, reparations for the families of those killed, full membership in the Dominion as equal partners. Mitchell stared at the message in disbelief. They're actually backing down? They studied our history. Kate's smile grew wider. They finally understand what they're dealing with. The negotiations took months, but in the end, a new treaty was signed. Human colonies became independent territories under their own governance. The Valori soldiers responsible for the massacre were put on trial and punished. Commander Vexisnar's name was erased from Valori records in permanent shame. More importantly, word spread throughout the galaxy. Species that had lived under Valori rule for centuries heard the story of New Haven. They heard how a handful of humans had defeated 800 warriors through courage, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to give up. For many of those species, it was the first time they had ever imagined that the Valori could be beaten. New alliances began to form. Trade agreements were signed. Human ships started traveling to distant stars, carrying not weapons but ideas, freedom, independence, the belief that no species should bow to another. 1 year after the battle, Ben Carter stood at his daughter's grave. The small headstone was surrounded by flowers now, planted by colonists who remembered Lily's laugh and her bright eyes. We won, Ben said softly. Not just the battle, all of it. The Valori see us as equals now. They'll never forget what we're capable of. He knelt down and touched the stone. I wish you could have seen it, sweetheart. I wish you could have grown up in the world we're building now. A world where nobody looks down on us, where nobody thinks they can hurt us without consequences. He was quiet for a long moment. I miss you every day. I'll miss you for the rest of my life. But I want you to know that your death wasn't meaningless. It changed everything. It woke us up. It reminded us who we are. He stood and looked up at the sky, where ships from a dozen species now traveled among the stars. Humans came to this galaxy with open hands and peaceful hearts. We wanted to be friends. We wanted to learn and grow together. But when they pushed us, we pushed back. And now, the whole galaxy knows the truth about us. Ben walked back toward the colony, where his fellow humans were building a new future. They had shown the universe that kindness was not weakness, that peace was a choice, not a surrender, and that those who mistook their gentleness for helplessness would learn a very hard lesson. Humanity had found its place among the stars, and it had earned that place the hard way by proving that the species most other aliens dismissed as harmless was actually the most dangerous thing in the cosmos. Not because humans wanted to hurt anyone, but because when they had to, they were very, very good at it. Far across the galaxy, other species read the story of New Haven and drew their own conclusions. Some were frightened, some were inspired. But all of them agreed on one thing. When dealing with humans, it was best to be polite, just in case